environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
It just occurred to me that I don't know the collective noun for a group of meerkats. Is it a pack, a tribe, a herd? Joe, help me out here, because I was just about to declare that, we've got the full complement here. Scott the Velvet Glove, who was ill last week.
Apparently it's a mob.
A mob, okay. We have a full mob of meerkats for you on this podcast, dear listener. Streaming live to you from Brisbane, 8 p.m. on Mondays. And, a podcast where we talk about news and politics, sex and religion, like a small mob of meerkats. We're on our little hill looking out on the world, trying to figure out what's going on and trying to explain it to each other and to you, the dear listener. I'm Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist. Returning from an illness is Scott the Velvet Glove. Tell everybody how you are, Scott.
I'm very well, thanks, Trevor. I'm back over it and all that sort of stuff. It only knocked me on my ass for 2 days. I didn't feel all that good on Sunday night, but I went to bed early and woke up feeling really shitty on Tuesday. So aside from that, I was over it on Wednesday. So on Monday actually. So on Tuesday, I tested myself again, was still showing a faint line of being positive. So I tested myself again on Friday and it was almost gone. So I tested myself on Saturday morning. It was completely clear.
Very good. Of course, COVID is what Scott had, everybody.
Yes.
So, and with 5 vaccinations under his belt, he was able to deal with it.
That's probably why I was able to get over it so quickly.
Yeah. Yep. And Joe, you've had your own medical episodes, but we won't go into the details of those because they're quite messy, really. And we don't want to ruin anybody's dinner with that. So we'll just leave that as it is. Yeah. So if you're in the chat room, say hello. Nobody there yet, but people normally turn up. What's on the agenda? Well, it's a podcast about news and politics, sex and religion in Australia and around the world. We're going to start with Australia with the tax changes, stage 3, and the fact that Dutton is now getting wedged by this. There's an essential poll came out, guys. I didn't give this to you in the notes, but we'll run through Australians and their views on stage 3, Gaza and the Republic. We'll talk about a bit of statistics because we were mentioning average wage the other day. And I came across another article talking about how do we talk about average wage, median wage in Australia. And a school tragedy that has parents crying, a spy pigeon, a Chinese spy pigeon. Scott, one of my favourite animal stories that we did was Dexter the peacock. Do you remember Dexter the peacock?
That was the travelling companion bird, wasn't it?
Yes,
the
support animal.
Support animal, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite an impressive peacock.
Yeah, full-size peacock, and the person arrived at the airport and expected to be able to board the plane with their support animal, which was Dexter the peacock. That's going back a long way. That was in the first handful of episodes, I reckon, that one, Scott.
It's probably pretty early.
Yeah, going back about 8 years or so, Dexter the peacock. Wonder whatever happened to Dexter. And might get on to Imran Khan. I think we'll get on to Imran Khan in Pakistan and what's happened there. No surprise, but it's going to involve some foreign policy meddling by the United States of America. And Saul Eslake described the worst policy decision by an Australian government ever. Scott Morrison's hands are all over it, so we might get onto that. So that's on the agenda. There's chapters for this podcast. If your app is smart enough, you should be able to see some chapters. You can scoot around the topics, skip some, listen to some twice. It's up to you. But, okay, let's get going. Well, saw an article that said opposition leader Peter Dutton's seat of Dixon, which is your electorate, Joe.
Yep, never voted for him.
No, can't blame you. In the analysis found 85% of taxpayers would be better off under Labor's plan than the original format for the stage 3 tax cuts. He hasn't declared what the Liberal Party is going to do when the revamped tax cuts come before Parliament. But
He's choice.
he's got no choice, has he, Scott?
No, he's got absolutely no choice to back them. I mean, it was bloody criminal stupidity that the Labor government actually backed the original stage 3 tax cuts. Now, I said right from word go that all he had to do was actually during the election campaign, he said, look, we're committed to stage 3, but we're not committed to the way that stage 3 has been originally written. So, assuming we win, we will have a look at them and we will rejig them. And that would have been fine.
And they were worried about being wedged. And,
Yeah, I know.
And look, lo and behold,
Yeah,
they're
no,
now wedging
Dutton's now wedged.
Dutton.
Yeah.
Because it just makes sense. The original policy was so bad.
I know.
If
it
you
was
can't take a
appallingly
bad
badly.
policy and explain it, offer an alternative and wedge your opponent on that, then you just shouldn't be in the game. So,
But you do realise that Dixon will still vote Dutton back in.
of course.
God alone knows why.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because I gather that Dixon isn't one of the wealthier suburbs of Brisbane, is it?
No,
Well,
it's the outer suburb.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be, you wouldn't have many millionaires out there. So God knows. I mean, it's not like even the guy that's Max, whatever his name is, the Green. You know, he represents Bulimba and Hawthorn and all that sort of things, which are really the premier suburbs in Brisbane.
Mm.
And, you know, I just think to myself that Dutton is really, you know, I cannot believe that he was actually going to try and make out that this was a terrible, ghastly thing that the Prime Minister did by breaking an election promise. You know, it's one of those things. Like I remember at the time you were saying that either the Shovel or something else was saying, oh, but we didn't think he was serious to Albanese, you know, which is just, it's one of those things. It was so blatantly obvious that it was wrong that anyone that actually tried to defend it need their heads read.
Yeah.
Because the voters here will be looking at Facebook adverts from Dutton, which will no doubt spin it in his light.
Well, they've joined the Liberal tribe, and as part of their loyalty to the tribe, they will vote for them, even if the policies are against their best interest.
Personal interest, yeah.
Because Labor raises taxes.
Yes.
And they're going to be worse off under a Labor government.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because Liberals are much better economic managers, just all those things. But there's really an interesting class thing happening here, because traditionally, you know, the Liberals and the Nationals were the Conservatives who were seen as the party for the well-to-do. And if you look, though, at their actual electorates that they're representing, because they've been pushed out into these regional suburbs, regional areas, they've actually been pushed out where their remaining base is the lower socioeconomic group. So I saw this tweet from Cos Samaras saying that, did you know that the National Party, with the LNP and to a lesser extent the Liberal Party, hold well over half of the top 20 poorest federal seats in the country? They now hold none of the top income electorates. So they really need to work out which class they want to represent. So
Well, that's because all those electorates fell to the Teals.
Yes.
You know, it's just
or to the Greens.
Or to the Greens, yeah.
Yeah. So they still think of themselves as a party for the upper class, sort of financially, but they've pitched themselves through sort of culture war issues, I guess, to a policy platform,
lower middle class,
that is really only finding favour in the regions where people are poorer. So this party of the upper class is now representing,
well,
effectively the lower class at the electorate level.
They're the party of theocracy, and a lot of the poorer certainly the western Sydney suburbs are the
True.
more religious. It's the hills.
Yeah.
I think it's much more the party of family values rather than the party of the rich.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, economically, it definitely is the party of the rich, but socially, it's the party of family values.
Yeah. So they've just reached this point where their policy talk on things like tax and the, well, what did Nationals leader, what's his name?
David Littleproud?
Littleproud, yeah. By the way, my wife taught him when he was in primary school in Chinchilla.
Really?
Yeah, there, fun fact for you.
She obviously didn't hit him hard enough.
Now, Joe.
Yeah. I think his father was some sort of state member at the time.
I think I think he did have that sort of lineage that his father or something like that was some kind of either he was obviously a National Party man, and
Yes.
he was probably in the state parliament because back then anyone could get in if you just held your flag up and said I'm a National Party man, you'll get a job there. You know?
Yeah. So that was Chinchilla. Chinchilla, by the way, was considered just east of Too Far West because it was a 3.5 hour drive. So if you really had something on the weekend, you could make it back to Brisbane. So anyway, I've digressed. But what did he say? He said that the tax cuts in their original format were about giving everyone a fair go, and that 190,000 a year is not a lot. Is what?
Well, I suppose it's not when your starting salary is $210,000 a year. You know.
Yeah. I think maybe I'll skip forward to what is a lot, or what is the average. If 109, we're going to say 190,000 is a lot. So, guys, it was a bit further down in the notes, but let's just skip through to it because the Prime Minister noted that under the revision to the tax scales, an average wage earner on $73,000 per year would be $1,500 better off. So Albanese was saying that the average wage earner is comes out at $73,000 per year. If he's correct, then when Littleproud says 190 is not a lot, I think Littleproud's wrong. But yeah, so
That's sort of 2.5 times as large, isn't it?
yeah. So when they were selling the package, because remember, this is a goddamn policy that's nearly 6 years old, like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. The craziness of this is policy written 6 years ago that is finally sort of come to the point where it was due to be implemented. So back in 2018, when the Morrison government was it Morrison? It was one of the Conservative governments, was selling the idea. And at that time of the budget, they were saying the annual wage was $84,000 per year, and the Treasury forecasting a rise to 103. So if the budget was talking about the average as being 84,000 back then, how can Albanese be saying it's 73,000 now, and what exactly is the average income? And as this writer in an article says, and you get the article in the show notes, dear listener, it's Harry Chemay writing in, I'm pretty sure it was the John Energy blog. He says, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. We found that during the COVID time. Boy, did we torture some data, or did some people torture some data at that point? Yeah, we won't go there. So what he says, on closer inspection, the PM's reference to 73,000 is a reference to the average current taxable income across all full-time workers. And back in 2018, it was the annualised average weekly earnings of a full-time adult at the time, rather than all full-time workers. And what we've got, of course, is, dear listener, the incomes at the top end are extremely high, which skew the average to a higher point than if you had lined every Australian up and walked along the line and stopped at the halfway point, thereby getting the median wage. So that to me would seem like the best measure of the average Australian. Scott, would you agree that if you just lined everybody up, poorest to, lowest income to highest income and stopped halfway, that's a better assessment of average?
I would have thought so, but I'm a fairly simplistic bloke. I just like to add it up and divide by the numbers, that's all.
Really?
Yeah.
Joe, what's your preference for talking about an average Aussie income?
Well, so there are three averages, isn't there? There's the mean, median, and mode.
Yeah.
And the mode is actually the most numerous of all incomes.
Yes.
So you break people into bands or whatever, and then you take the most popular of those bands. And that
Yes.
probably is the better outcome. But the median is considerably better than the mean.
As a method.
The mean is simple, but it gets skewed by outliers.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, which it does. Yeah.
All right.
So that's, I understand what you're saying. You're criticising my choice of mean. So, anyway.
Yeah, I'm surprised by your preference for it. Yeah.
No, it's one of those things. I'll take anything. I'm not going to sit there and actually calculate it myself. So I'll just take the median. Yeah.
Let me scoot forward to get to. He says in this article, the suggestion that 200,000 might be a middling income must surely push the bounds of credulity. And he says the median is not 200,000. Basically, what does he say here? Data
It's nowhere
indicates
close to it.
that the average full-time adult worker earning 85,000 in 2018 is earning around 99,000 in May 23. So average full-time adult worker. The median full-time earnings back in 2018 was 76,000 and now it's 88,000. So if you're looking at full-time job, then the median full-time job salary in Australia is currently around 88,000. I think that's a sort of a fair, seems about right to me. There we go. That's
Which
what
is
you're...
a long way short of $190,000.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back to Essential Report. And let me just find this. So they've been polling people about their reactions to the stage 3 tax cuts and what's been going on. And basically, overall, only, now it depends on the poll that you look at. The Essential poll says only 22% of people want the stage 3 tax cuts to remain unchanged. So that's a huge proportion of the population agreeing with Labor at least that it needs to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the wedge that Dutton is facing, that if he was to insist on no changes, only 22% of people would agree with him. Actually, maybe I can share this screen. Let me try and do that.
I suppose that, how big a threat are the Greens and that sort of stuff? Could they actually cross the floor and vote to actually... No, they wouldn't actually keep them, would they? If they did, they'd look very bloody stupid, wouldn't they?
Oh, the Greens will try and push for...
Yeah, I know they're gonna push to have more of it heading down the lower end, but I just think to myself that they've got a choice in the end. Is either they either take what Labor has offered them, or they actually vote to maintain the current package, which would make them look very bloody stupid.
Yeah. So, top chart there is basically overall, because they asked people a year, sort of in November 23 what they thought. Then they asked them again in January 24. Nothing changed much, but essentially 22% of people say leave it as it is. The rest, to some degree, want things changed. And males, 27% want to leave the tax cuts as they were designed by Scott Morrison.
Because
Females, 17% want to leave them. So women more likely to want the tax cuts changed. And age-wise, this one's interesting. 18 to 34, 17% want them to continue. Middle-aged Australians also want them to continue, 26%. It actually decreased a bit for the boomers. So the boomers aren't as bad as they normally are when it comes to that age demographic. And
they're not earning income.
Yes, that's it. At that point, you're right, Joe. They're asset rich and income poor. Of course.
Ask them what they think of franking credits, and you get a different story.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll get on to franking credits. And Coalition, according to Essential Poll, 33% of Coalition voters wanted to leave the tax cuts as they were originally designed. Everybody else is around the 16%. So that was on the sort of Australia's view on the tax cuts. Just while we're here on the Essential Poll, next one coming up is attitudes to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the third one on the chart is the one that gets me here, guys, is to what extent do you agree with the following statement? And the statement is, the Israeli response is proportionate. And 12% of Australians agree with that, and 20% somewhat agree, and 45% neither agree nor disagree. So to some extent, 32% of Australians think that the Israeli response is proportionate and 45% just don't know. That leaves only 22% of Australians who think that the Israeli response is disproportionate. Does that seem strange to you?
Well, I think 45% of people just don't care.
Yes. You're dead right. 45% just don't care. Yeah. Gender-wise on that one, let's see what the breakup is. And the Israeli response is proportionate. 39% of males agree, only 25% of females agree. And voting intention. The Israeli response is proportionate. 44% of coalition voters agree. 15% of Greens voters. It's just interesting that something that's, a conflict in the Middle East between two countries splits opinion here so much along party lines, party political lines. Like, our political parties don't have strongly stated foreign policy views going into an election. Nobody really looks at foreign policy. And it's just amazing that it breaks down on party lines so much what people think.
Yeah, but Dutton did make a big song and dance about it and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
He accused the Labor Party of being anti-Zionist or something like that, didn't he? He accused them of anti-Semitism.
But Palestine has long been a thing of the left, and therefore it doesn't surprise me that the Greens voters, because I really don't consider Labour left anymore, possibly centrist, and LNP voters are again theocrats who want the end of the world.
Yes,
and the sooner that the Arabs and the Israelis keep killing themselves, the sooner Jesus comes back.
Yes. In Australia, have we reached that point in Australia, Joe?
I don't
don't believe it's
larger proportion, but
no, but there is certainly part of it. Part of it is that thinking. There is some within the Liberal Party that would actually hold that view because their mates over in the Yanks in America believe that.
They also polled people about Australia Day and asked people will you be doing something to celebrate Australia Day, or will you just be treating it as a public holiday? And basically, people have tended towards treating it as a public holiday, not necessarily doing something to celebrate the Australianness of it. But if you look at the age breakdown, the older you are, the more likely you are to celebrate Australia Day as Australia Day rather than just enjoying the public holiday. And just finally, they also asked people about support for Australia becoming a republic. And Scott strongly support. Young people recorded the lowest. So only 12% of the young people, 18 to 34, strongly supported a republic, whereas the older age groups, that was either 22 or 23%. So you're still a card-carrying member of the...
Yeah, I am. Of the Republican movement. Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. I think that probably the Republican movement's biggest problem is that we're facing a generation of they don't care. So as a result, it really doesn't surprise me that people don't care and that type of thing. So that's where you've got those sorts of numbers coming up. It's one of those things. I did see something with it. They reckon that the Crown has had probably a bigger impact on the Republican movement than anything else has.
Yeah, that series on Netflix.
Yeah, it did. It did actually paint the old girl as a complex figure.
Yeah, complex, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
A complete bitch at times, and
a complete bitch at times, but other times quite a human being. And it's one of those things. Apparently, she has watched it and that sort of stuff, and she actually admitted that she does feel somewhat bad for the way she treated her sister over here.
This is Queen Elizabeth.
Yes.
Was it produced before she died?
Yes, it was produced before she died.
Right. Yeah. Okay. There you go. I only just
been out
saw
for
it
a while.
It's been out for a long time.
6 months ago, something there. That's how far behind the times I am. Right.
Yeah, it's apparently that she admitted to someone that she feels badly for the way she treated her sister.
Right.
Over her marriage to Peter Townsend.
There we go. So you're right. The younger group have a bit more ambivalent about it all and don't have any strong views. So, yeah. Anyway, that was Essential Poll. Get rid of that from the screen. Yeah. And Alison's in the chat room and says she saw a report that said 2/3 of people earning over 200,000 or above support the changes. I saw a similar thing. I think that was from the Australia Institute.
That was it, yes.
Yeah. And, look, just briefly, one more chart to show you because I've got it here, which was just a chart showing how much is carved off from helping the top end and then comes into assisting the bottom end. So that was a good chart if it shows up correctly on there. But does it? Hang on. Yeah.
It's showing up.
Yeah, good. So that was that one.
I think that honestly they've got to be very comfortable with it because they're getting $4,500 out of it all, which on a weekly basis turns out to be $86 a week, which is fine. You know, you compare that to the 9,000 they were originally going to get, then that is just too high.
Yeah. So there's a guy, Richard Dennis, from the Australia Institute.
He used to have a podcast that I listened to whenever it came out. It was the can't think what it was called, but he's an economist.
Yes.
Yeah. And he does he turns up sometimes on 7 a.m. too.
Yeah. Good talker. And
absolutely.
He's got some things to say about mining tax and HEX. Here we go. Have a listen to this.
Let's consider the fact that in Norway, they tax the fossil fuel industry and they give university education to their kids for free. In Australia, we subsidise the fossil fuel industry and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. Choices matter. And the Australian government collects more money from HEX than it does from the petroleum resource rent tax. Thank you, children. You're the backbone of our economy, not the gas industry.
That's an interesting statistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fucking wrong, isn't it? You get,
If you could just reach people and tell them that, you wouldn't have to argue too long to say this is clearly wrong.
exactly.
Look what these other guys are doing. Maybe we should be doing the same. How about we
Exactly.
do it? If you don't like it, don't vote for us. But if you do like it, vote for us.
It's
and see
one of
what
those
happens.
things. I just think to myself that if we actually did follow Norway's example, do they honestly believe that the coal miners and the gas frackers and everything else that are over here in this country, do we honestly believe that they would actually pull up stumps and move elsewhere? No,
No.
they wouldn't. They come here and they invest here because our ground is full of shit that they can dig out and sell overseas.
Yeah. Just criminal. Future generations are going to be so angry with.
And even if
Our
they did up
generation.
sticks, the stuff's still in the ground.
Yes. Wait
Hey,
for someone
well,
else
we
to
can't
come along
Yeah,
who's
exactly.
willing to play the game and
Yep.
and say, okay, here's a deal for you. You still make lots of money, just not obscene amounts of money. It's criminal. The future generations are going to look back on Australia in the last 50 years and just go, what a
they're gonna
shonky
be-
bunch you were.
And they're going to be very rightfully very angry about it. You know?
Well, I mean, the whole, wasn't it Sasson Lay, who was
Yes.
held originally to be responsible for future generations, the state of the climate for future generations? I know it was overturned on appeal. But is that not precedent for suing governments for inaction just over the amount of money that's being wasted?
On behalf of a future generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what the current legal position is on that. I do remember there were those cases
Yeah.
where
So they
were,
won in the lower court, and I think it was overturned in one of the higher courts.
but it might have been on a technicality.
Possibly.
Yeah. There really should be a minister for future generations who gets to say, hang on a minute, this is just lining the pocket of the current generation at the expense of the future generation.
Well, I think that's really bloody crooked that, you know, the HEX is higher than the mining resource rent tax, for Christ's sake. You know?
Yeah, there we go. But even when things are obvious like that, can a government actually sell it? And of course, we had Shorten could not make it into being the Prime Minister on the basis probably of the franking credits
Yeah.
and how that panned out. And there we go. There's a chart showing that the richest 10% received 70% of the franking credits in 2021.
But they need them.
Yes.
It's one of those things that I find incredibly frustrating. Like, my old man's very much in support of it. And I just said to him once, I said, why? You know, it was designed not to pay you back the tax. It was simply designed to stop you being double taxed. And it was just something that Peter Costello invented because he was embarrassed by the amount of money that was flowing to the government. So
Yeah.
they had no choice but to actually give it back to people.
Yeah. Governments in good times are really dangerous.
Oh,
How
God, yeah, they are.
Costello government was dangerous. They could do all sorts of things.
Mm.
And lock us into systems and become really hard to turn around. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Here's another clip for you. I unfortunately in high school went to an all-boys school. And it's one of the, I don't know if you could say regrets of life, but because I didn't have any say in it. But boy, I wished I'd gone to a co-ed state school, and took me years to overcome what had been done to me there. And so I was really determined that my kids would go to a co-ed school and have a normal childhood, which they did, thankfully. But let me just get a clip here, because one of the schools in Melbourne, I think it is,
I believe it's Sydney, isn't it?
Sydney, wasn't it?
I think it's Sydney.
Previously a boys' school, a principal has decided to make it a co-ed school. And here is the reaction.
Well, I'm an old boy of the school, and my son is also an old boy. And the intention was always that I'd have a grandson, but I won't bring him to a co-ed school.
It's all part of this sort of woke, toxic masculinity type palaver.
I'm sorry, but I'm not a co-ed person.
It's a boys' school. It's always been a boys' school, and there's no justification, no explanation, no evidence to support this move.
I know my grandson was rejected from going to year 3 in a couple of years' time because they had thoughts of young ladies.
We are protesting against the school's decision to not notify the parents and gag the parents and the students from having a free voice to be heard about the school and the headmaster's decision to make the school co-ed.
It wasn't as strong as I would have liked to have seen today.
Well, I just think it's ridiculous that after 160 years of thinking it's a good idea to have a boys-only school for the development of boys through very developmental part of their lives without being influenced by considerations of what they should look like or how they should act in front of girls. Why is that wrong after 160 years?
We have another meeting tonight that we're going to try and look at more at the legal side.
Yeah, 160 years. I mean, it's not like we've ever seen evidence of private school boys behaving badly.
Hang on. Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people.
Yes.
It's one of those things. I mean, it's one of those things. When I was at my old boys' school and that sort of stuff, I remember thinking at the time that I would be better off in a co-ed school because guys behave differently in front of girls than what they do on their own, because they behave like utter wankers when they're on their own. You know, the bullying and everything else would evaporate overnight if you put girls in there.
Oh, I'm not so sure about that, but
it would help.
Educationally, I think boys do better off in co-ed and girls do worse.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, exactly. Which is one of the things I just thought to myself that because they say that girls do better in single-sex schools, but boys do better in co-ed schools. So,
my kids went to just a state high school, co-ed, obviously, and they reckon at university you could pick the kids who had gone to a single-sex school. Like their just behaviour was really obvious, they reckon. So, yeah. Alison, are you still there in the chat room? Did you go to an all-girls school, Alison? Did you find at university a difference between boys who went to an all-boys school, for example? Were they...
I wouldn't be surprised that anybody that did go to a co-ed school and that sort of stuff would probably say that boys were just a little less mature and that sort of stuff by the time we got to university.
But the girls as well. I know that my daughter said that girls...
Mackay State High School was where Alison went to, so she went
there
to
you go.
co-ed school.
Yeah, but Alison, when you went to uni, did you notice any difference between those, who had... your fellow students who had been to single-sex schools or not? Just curious as to whether you noticed anything. So, yeah, there we go. So that's private school. First world problem there. The guy's
I
crying.
can't believe that guy was crying.
Yes.
It's one of
The
those
plan
things
was like, I was going to have a grandchild, but I can't have one now.
Yes. There we go.
I thought it was weird that all private school boys all wore the same clothes. Yeah.
There you go. So they had a certain type of dress style, is what Alison is saying, I think, at university. Yeah. Okay. That was that. Let's look around the world now. Get away from Australia. Iran, Iraq. So now we've got... there was an attack on a US Army base in Jordan, killed three US soldiers. The US is blaming Iranian-backed militants. It was some sort of drone, I think, came into the camp. And they've then launched tax on what they say are Iranian facilities that are in other neighbouring countries and places. So they're saying it's Iran's fault, and they've bombed a few Iranian-backed places in non-Iranian territory. Because, hey, they're the US, and if you're not bombing some brown people in a sandy desert somewhere, then just, you're not doing your job. And, of course, Iraqi resistance is claiming responsibility, and the base is actually mostly in Syria and is used by the US to steal Syrian oil, and the Iraqi government wants the US to leave as well. So there's still enormous numbers of US personnel and US bases in these countries, despite the new governments wanting them to just piss off and go home. But they insist on staying there. So, guys, you reckon there might... we did predictions at the beginning of the year, and I don't know that anybody predicted a sort of a hot war in the Middle East, like getting quite sizable. But
I think it's going that way.
They're really keen to blame Iran for stuff. They talk about the Iranian-backed Houthis, and they're clearly trying to pin Iran for this. And Iran's one of the bigger militaries able to...
they've wanted to pick a fight with Iran for a long time, but
yes,
I think they've always been scared off because it is one of the bigger militaries.
Yes. But
that's why they backed Saddam for so long.
It's one of those things, if it does actually come to fisticuffs and all that sort of stuff, I've no doubt that the US will eventually succeed. But they're going to have to withdraw their support from Ukraine and everything else, put everything into the Middle East, and they will succeed. It's going to take them a very long time, but they will do it.
Succeed as well as they did in Afghanistan?
No, it's one of those things. They're just going to leave behind a wrecked country and all that sort of stuff that wasn't perfect but was stable, and they're going to fuck it up completely, and then they'll withdraw.
Yeah, they'll succeed. They'll succeed in transferring funds from the hands of taxpayers into the pockets of big corporations.
Yes. The military-industrial complex and the makers of weapons and...
Yes.
Yeah.
But also the private security industry that follows along behind and builds all the infrastructure, rebuilds the country.
Yeah.
That was Dick Cheney's company, wasn't it? Hollywell or something like that? Or
Hollywell was one of the companies, yeah.
Well, it was also
sort of like that.
Black something?
BlackRock?
BlackRock.
No.
Yeah.
Blackpool?
I can't remember what it was.
Can't remember either.
BlackRock, anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, they're spoiling for a fight over there, and
if they want to fight and that sort of stuff, they're going to get a fight. But then their only support in the region is going to be Israel, which will make it all that sort of a hell of a lot of a mess for them. And it's the 67 war, the Israelis won. I'm not convinced that would actually win another concerted effort of Arab countries if all three of the Arab countries actually took on Israel again this time.
But they do have nukes.
I know they've got nukes now, and I honestly believe that Israel would actually be prepared to use them.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they would.
Blackwater, according to Don.
Thanks, Don. Yeah. Anyway, they're spoiling for a fight over there. See what happens. That's the Iranians. And I like this one about the spy pigeon. So...
Yeah, I was reading that. I thought to myself, Jesus Christ, how the hell did that happen? Anyway.
A pigeon has been released in India after being held in detention for 8 months on suspicion of being a Chinese spy. The pigeon's ordeal began in May last year when it was captured near a port in Mumbai with 2 rings tied to its legs carrying words that appeared to be Chinese. Yeah.
Sure, they could have got them. They could have got them
used in the past.
Yeah, but they could have got them translated. They could have actually got the words and that sort of stuff translated into Hindi and that sort of stuff. And then there was it's not a spy pigeon,
Yeah. But Don in the chat room says you do know that the birds aren't real. They're all surveillance drones. Yeah. Because you've heard about that person starting that movement, Birds Aren't Real.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
You've actually got dickheads there in the US actually dragging around signs saying birds aren't real.
yes. So the guy who started it did it as a joke. And
Yeah, I
then
know.
It seemed like there were enough people who were prepared to sign up to the belief that it became a thing. But yeah, anyway, the animal turned out to be a racing bird from Taiwan, which had escaped and travelled to India. And,
So it was in Chinese.
Yes. Yeah. Joe, when you said they've done it before,
Yeah.
like they've used carrier pigeons to pass messages.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's an April Fool's. So on the internet, there's a bunch of standards that are called RFCs, and quite often there's an April 1st RFC.
Right.
And one of them is IP over avian carrier, which was literally sticking a thumb drive onto a carrier pigeon to send messages. And it has been done in real life. Somebody decided to print out a message, a computer message, onto paper, stick it on the leg of a carrier pigeon, a racing pigeon, send it across town, and then decode it.
Right. See, some people have just too much time on their hands. Yeah.
Obviously.
Anyway, with typical Indian efficiency, it took them 8 months to figure out that it was just a harmless racing pigeon. There we go. Yeah. Apparently, it's not the first time a bird has come under police suspicion in India. In 2020, police in Indian-controlled Kashmir released a pigeon belonging to a Pakistani fisherman after a probe found that the bird, which had flown across the heavily militarised border between the nuclear-armed nations, was not a spy. And, yeah, so it's not the first time. And I thought
What are they going to do with a bird? What are they going to do? Put a gun to its head and say, you've got to confess or we'll shoot you?
Well,
it's just one of those things. You just...
Well, I don't,
they could just shoot it and it would be dead. It's all over.
It's a very effective method of transferring messages. We used to do it.
It is.
Back up until the end of the First World War.
Exactly. But, you could find out what that message actually said. They just actually have to take the paper off it, get it translated into Hindi, and they say, oh, fuck, it's got nothing to do with it.
But it's in code.
Yeah. And, Indians have got lots of important stuff that China would just want to find out about. So
I don't know about China, but certainly Pakistan.
I know that China would like to know what India's up to, but it's just... Yeah, they have come to blows over their Indian-Chinese border, but, it's just one of those things. I just don't believe that they kept a bird in custody for 8 months.
Yeah. Anyway, it was in ABC News, reported by the Associated Press, so one assumes that the incident is correct. So, had you guys been following Imran Khan at all? And
yeah,
had you had any understanding of what's going on there?
It's one of those things I didn't I know that he had actually spoken out against the US and all that sort of stuff before I actually read the whole thing that you sent it. And it's one of those things. Was he too cooperative with Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping? I don't know. It's just one of those things. He's probably too close to the Russians. But anyway, he's a prime minister of an independent country. He's entitled to have any sort of relationship he wishes to have around the globe. I honestly do not believe that what he was actually crucified for was that bad. All he said was, you've got to actually solve this. You've got to solve this fight diplomatically, not on the battlefield. Which is a perfectly valid thing for a country to say.
Aggressively neutral, I think it was described as.
They might call it aggressively neutral, but
Why are you being so aggressively neutral on this issue?
I just think to myself that Imran Khan, he was probably the best that Pakistan had to offer and all that type of thing. So,
Joe, were you going to say something?
Sorry.
Yeah, I thought that he was scarily religious in some things.
Yeah, but he wasn't as religious
like
as
devout
some of the
Muslim,
others.
Perhaps. His wife is very, wears the full burqa, I think, or a fairly
A
full
niqab,
covering.
doesn't she?
Maybe not the burqa, but the next
Yeah,
next
niqab,
level.
doesn't she?
Yeah, I think she might be quite religious, but
Yeah, I thought there was something about blasphemy that he'd made comments on, or he'd brought in some blasphemy law that was maybe he wasn't such a.
As much as I'm pro-secular, whatever he did in that line isn't enough to justify the US coming in and organising regime change and having him thrown in jail for 10 years. So, which is what's happened. So there's an article from Jeffrey Sachs. You guys probably don't like Jeffrey Sachs because he was kind of taking I was taking his line on Ukraine and stuff. So anyway. So in this article by Jeffrey Sachs, he says there's strong reasons to suspect the US is behind the overthrow of Imran Khan. And he says, of course, regime change by the US is routine. And there's a link to a report that counts 64 covert regime change operations by the US between 1947 and 1989. That's a lot. And he says that Imran Khan's sin was to be too cooperative with Putin and Xi Jinping, and while seeking to just have normal relations with the United States. And Khan, from the start, said the conflict should be settled at the negotiating table rather than on the battlefield. Like, guys, stop killing each other and start negotiating. He probably sealed his fate, though, when he held a large rally and he berated the West, and particularly EU ambassadors, for pressuring him to condemn Russia. And he also complained about NATO's war against terror in Afghanistan as having been very devastating for Pakistan. And he told the cheering crowd about the US ambassadors wrote a letter to us, meaning Khan and Pakistan, asking us to condemn and vote against Russia. What do you think of us? Are we your slaves? That whatever you say, we will do? He said, we are friends with Russia. We are also friends with America. We are friends with China and with Europe. We're not in any camp. Pakistan will remain neutral and work with those trying to end the war. So one day after that rally, there is an Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, a Donald Lu. So he's the American. He meets with Pakistan's ambassador, an Assad Majid Khan, and basically a cable is then sent from Khan back to, from the Pakistani ambassador back to Pakistan. And the cable quotes the American guy as saying to the Pakistani ambassador, the people here in Europe are quite concerned about why Pakistan has taken such an aggressively neutral position. And then said, quote, I think if the no confidence vote against the Prime Minister succeeds, all will be forgiven. So basically telling the ambassador that the US will forgive Pakistan if there's a no confidence motion against Imran Khan. And otherwise, it's going to be tough going ahead. So 5 weeks later, after that threat, the Pakistan's military controls or has a hold over the Pakistani parliament and ousted Imran Khan in a no confidence vote. And then they, according to Jeffrey Sachs, brazenly manufactured charges of corruption against Imran Khan, put him under arrest, and when Khan made known the existence of that diplomatic cable and the threat made by America, the new government charged Imran Khan with espionage. And that's what he's been convicted of for 10 years. So the Americans threatened Pakistan, basically saying, life's not going to be good for you unless you do a no confidence motion against Imran Khan. And when Imran Khan revealed that message, he was in charge with espionage against Pakistan and given 10 years. When asked about Khan's conviction, the State Department had the following to say, quote, "It's a matter for the Pakistani courts." And there we have it. A man in another country thrown into jail for 10 years for being aggressively neutral. It's quite a story, isn't it? Joe, any thoughts on that one? Any hesitation? Any sort of sounds about right? Or you're like, yeah, it's a bit of a beat up, or you just don't know?
It's Pakistan. I can't say I'm surprised. There's a lot of corruption there, as far as I know.
Yeah.
There is, but as to whether or not Khan was actually knee deep in it, like they allege, is another story. You know,
and fine. Sorry, go on.
It's one of those things. I don't think we're ever going to know exactly what the truth is.
Yeah.
Well, if he wasn't and his opponents were, it's a good thing to smear him with, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Apparently, that message is in the public domain now. It's been leaked, and it seems it's legitimate. So there we go. A successful regime change. Chalk up another one for the United States. And finally, in the show notes that the patrons get will be an article from Saul Eslake. He says, so you guys ever heard Saul Eslake speak?
Never heard him speak. I've read a lot of what he's written. Never heard him speak.
Very, very smart guy.
He's a very intelligent bloke, for sure.
Yeah. I was at some talk about financial planning stuff, and he just spoke for an hour and just had everybody captivated, like intimate knowledge of all sorts of statistics, really quite a bright guy. Anyway, he says, I regard the changes made to the carve-up of GST revenues among the states and territories by the Morrison government in 2019 as possibly the worst Australian public policy decision of the 21st century thus far. Big statement. Could it be worse than AUKUS, I ask you? I don't know that it is, but it's probably a close-run thing. And essentially, the story is this, that when the GST was created, and it's the federal government collecting money, which is then distributed to the states, and there was a principle of horizontal fiscal equalisation, which was if some states are financially better off than other states, then they'll get less of the GST pie. A very sort of socialist approach to carving up the GST money. And for most of our history, Victoria and New South Wales would have been the most prosperous states, which would sort of lead to them getting less and the other states getting more per capita. But, of course, we've had a massive mining boom in Western Australia, huge boom. And similar to, as he says here, from 2004 onwards, Western Australia got, as Paul Keating would say, kissed on the arse by a rainbow, where the iron ore price rose to over $100 per tonne. So, for example, Western Australia's iron ore production in 1999 was 3.7 billion. And in the last 6 years, it's averaged 111 billion. So in 14 years, it went from 3.7 to 111 billion per annum. So massive production, and similar stories in relation to gold and LNG as well, like big boom, obviously, in Western Australia. And, of course, Western Australia will get royalties from all of that, which means that Western Australia is doing very, very well and is outpacing the other states because of that more than any state has ever outpaced the other states. And what Morrison did was called for a productivity commission report, but basically stitched things up so that the report was not done properly. Saul Eslake says people who worked on it were not happy with the way it was done, and some people resigned afterwards. And the result was that they changed the GST carve-up so that Western Australia would never get less than 70% per capita of what it would have got had there been none of this equalisation. So essentially, the previous system of less money to the wealthy states was changed by that system. And why would the other states agree to it? Well, Morrison put in a deal that no other state will be worse off for the next, let me see, for like 15 years or something like that. So it was a thing that a government could, one of the other states could just kick down the road, not going to be their problem, not going to be around in 20 years' time. So basically, Morrison did a deal that was extremely favourable to Western Australia, where it gets to keep a much bigger share of the GST carve-up than it would have. And why did it allow that to happen? Because
they were about to throw their toys out the pram.
Because they had a number of Western Australian representatives.
Correct. So a relatively large contingent of... So since the 2013 election, the Liberal National Party coalition held all but 3 of Western Australia's seats in the House of Reps. And after the narrow victory in 2016, they knew that if they had any chance of retaining government in 2019, they needed to keep as many Western Australian seats as possible. So that's why the LNP, Liberal National Party coalition, did this. Why did the Labor Party agree to it and vote for it? Because they wanted to pick up Labor. They thought that they would then, if they didn't do that, they were no chance of picking up seats for Labor in Western Australia. So Labor agreed to it. And so conversely, the Labor opposition knew that if it were to have any prospect of winning government at the 2019 election, they had to win at least some of those seats from the Liberals. Yeah. And the title of the bill is, wait for it, Treasury Laws Amendment, Making Sure Every State and Territory Gets Their Fair Share of GST, Bill 2018. Passed both houses of federal parliament with overwhelming majorities, even though it was a crummy deal for everybody outside of Western Australia. Problem with this podcast, it gets quite depressing. So many bad stories. So many bad stories. Let's just add that to it. Were you guys aware of that one at all?
Yeah, I was aware of it.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I never knew the details like that. No.
I knew that Western Australia had some kind of sweetheart deal on it, but I couldn't tell you what the numbers were.
Yeah. So there we go. Good job by Saul Eslake explaining that in quite some detail, which I've just paraphrased. So there we go. Well, guys, we finished on a sour note, I reckon. Imran Khan and the Western Australian GST carve up. As you go
Have
to
you
bed
guys
tonight,
heard of the UK post office scandal?
Yeah, that is bloody crook what's going on over there.
Tell me about it, Joe.
It's their equivalent to Robodebt. So the UK post office, which basically is the government department in small villages, it was all outsourced, and they rolled out a new computer system, which was overpriced and late. What a surprise. And suddenly said that all of these postmasters had been siphoning off money.
Right.
And
Accusing them of fraud.
Accusing them of fraud. So a whole bunch of them got sacked, and the government demanded money from them. A number of them were actually charged with criminal offences. And it turns out that the computer program was at fault.
Wow.
And that the government, this happened well over 10 years ago, and that the government is only just admitting to it. So, there are literally thousands of people whose lives have been turned upside down by a computer system that the government maintained was perfectly accurate. Like I said, shadows of Robodebt all
very
over
much
again.
very much a Robodebt thing. Anybody got a happy story?
No, I don't have a happy story. It's one of those things. I find it really bloody crooked that something like that could go, that you've got to the point where people were imprisoned.
Yes.
For this. And they had to prove that they were innocent more so than the other side proving that they were guilty. Had the onus of proof not actually been reversed, had the proof been on the prosecution, then someone would have found out that the computer system was fucked a long time ago. You know?
I imagine they probably had suicides and just marriage breakups.
They did have suicides and marriage breakups and God knows what else.
Oh, God. Well. Come on, guys. Something positive.
I'll work on it for next week.
Sorry, dear listener, but there you go. That's the state of the world at the moment. I guess we'll be back next week with more news and politics and sex and religion. We'll talk to you then. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from me.
And it's a good night from him.
Good night.